introduction. All right, I think people are still straggling back in, but now for the main event of this morning, we're going to move on to our wonderful youth panel, which will be moderated by Eileen Lee, who is the Chief of Programs for the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, and she oversees all their grant-making activities. But she has spent a lot of time up in Canada here and parts north because she led the Environmental Conservation Program as well as the Wild Salmon Ecosystems and the Conservation and Markets Initiative. Before she joined the foundation, she was at McKinsey, and she led strategy, operational and organizational effectiveness across a wide range of sectors. So a really interesting background, you know, a bit like Carlos Manuel, a lawyer by training, but a great conservation leader by choice. So as an amazing person, I'm not going to read all the board she's on, but I do want to say that she is someone who actually truly works from global to local and gives of her valuable time to her local community and environmental initiatives there, as well as helping us save the globe. She's been very central to 30 by 30, and so I'll turn this over to Eileen to introduce and bring up our students and have the conversation. So Eileen, thank you so much for doing this. Over to you.
Thank you, Rosina. Ooh, can you hear me okay? Good morning, everyone. As Rosina said, my work title is Chief of Programs, but probably the title that means the most to me is Working Mom. And I think for that reason, I'm especially excited to be able to be part of this panel today. You know, I would have to confess that in the role that I'm in some ways, you can get a little bit immune to the bad news about what's happening in the world. But I had a moment recently where it really caught me again by surprise because my youngest was finishing elementary school, and she was introduced by the principal as the class of 2030 for high school. And it really hit me because we spend so much time talking about how we're going to end and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030, protect 30% of lands and seas by 2030, get to net zero, climate neutral by 2030. And it really struck me, I think, along the lines of what Rosina said, that when she becomes an adult in 2030, I don't want to be handing her a world that is not, that isn't full of hope, that isn't thriving, as Rashid described. So for those of you that don't know the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, our mission is to create positive outcomes for future generations. And we do that through our conservation and science grant making. So for that reason also, I really feel privileged to get to be part of this panel today. I have to say, in reflecting on all the amazing bios of our speakers today, it struck me that in some ways it's selling them short to talk about them as youth leaders. Because what really struck me about this group of people is these are leaders that we should listen to, not just because they're young, but because they are people who are showing great courage in the face of a change, or in driving for the change that they are really seeking in the world, and finding innovative solutions, and being willing to challenge. And for me, these are leaders that I hope we can just listen to and who can share their stories with us today. So just to bring everybody up one by one, Frankie Marquez is the Community and Volunteer Engagement Manager for the Oceanwise Conservation Association here in Vancouver. Hi, Frankie. Skokwash Lillian is the Indigenous Climate and Policy Advisor for Videa. Marina Melanidis is the founder of Youth for Nature. Sophia Yang is the founder and executive director of Threading Change. Ray Kaliho is the West African organizer of the Climate Action Network of Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots. And Naina Agrawal-Hardin is a Yale University student and climate activist. Thank you so much for joining us today. Frankie, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Frankie, could you talk a little bit about the work you are doing at OceanWise around how dialogue can promote marine conservation and ocean restoration?
Yes, I can, and I'd love to start off with a story, a personal story. I am in my senior year of university studying environmental sciences, and I'm excited as I'm so close to graduating. One thing that people don't tell you about studying anything environment related is how absolutely hopeless the work can feel sometimes. I read another doom and gloom news article about another coral bleaching event in my home country, the Philippines, and my chest feels tight, my heart starts to beat faster, and tears start to well up in my eyes. I mentioned my feelings to one of my mentors, and they tell me to apply for this youth empowerment program by OceanWise called Ocean Bridge. It brings together youth across Canada and empowers them to take action for our oceans and our waterways. A few months later, I'm sitting on the shores of Lake Superior with these other leaders, and we were asked the question, what brought you to Ocean Bridge? And this is such a powerful question. We go around the circle, and I'm listening to all my newfound friends share their answers, and everyone is vulnerable and honest and passionate, and there's a shared sentiment of anger, frustration, and loneliness. And honestly, by the time it was my turn to share, I was very emotional and I was in tears, but they were tears of joy. And all I could say is, I'm not alone anymore. Hi everyone, my name is Frankie Marquez. I'm the Community and Volunteer Engagement Manager with OceanWise. OceanWise is a global ocean conservation organization dedicated to empowering communities to protect and restore our ocean. We are specifically targeting 3 problem areas that our ocean is facing, including plastic and pollution, overfishing, and climate change. So the Ocean Bridge program that I talked about is one of the many youth programs that OceanWise delivers, and this program truly changed my life in ways that I don't really have words for, and I feel very lucky and privileged to be giving back to this community that has given me so much. So in my role, I work with over 850 youth across Canada, and I help them take action for our oceans in their local community. In practice, what this looks like is we provide them with access to outdoor spaces, we provide them with mentorship and capacity building opportunities, and we also fund local service projects. Now, at OceanWise, with our youth programs, we practice dialogue. Now, what is dialogue? Well, my definition for dialogue is constantly evolving, but one definition that has stuck with me time and time again is that dialogue is not about having sides. It's about gathering around a center. And we live in a world that is so connected to each other, and when it comes to ocean conservation, there's so many different ways that any one person can be taking action for our oceans. So with our youth, rather than telling them what to do, we actually let them decide for themselves how they want to take action for our oceans. So a few examples of local community service projects that our youth have done: they have led shoreline cleanups, they've led some restoration projects. We had one youth lead a zero waste market. Another youth, who's a singer-songwriter, hosted a virtual Marine Melodies concert that brought together musical artists who had songs about nature. And the last one I'll share is we have an ambassador this year who's very passionate about plastic reduction and has designed a plastic reduction workshop specifically targeting the drag and the LGBTQ+ community to empower them to reduce their consumption of single-use plastics. So the examples of projects that I've shared are just a glimpse of the powerful and amazing things that youth can do when you truly give them the tools and the freedom to decide how they want to take action. So today we're here to be talking about youth engagement, or rather, a dialogue on youth engagement. My fellow panelists here have all identified their own centers that they're gathering around, and I'm really excited for us to learn more from them. And I invite you to also reflect on the idea that dialogue is not just about talking, it's also about listening. But not just any type of listening. It's about listening to understand and not necessarily to respond. So in spaces like this, I do believe that we lack empathy, and this is a good time for us to practice seeing the humanity in each other. So it's honestly a little bit ironic because we are in a climate crisis. Our planet and our ocean, they don't need more talk. They need action. However, we can't get meaningful action without dialogue across communities, generations, and demographics. With dialogue, it'll allow us to connect, learn, and empower each other on our path to a sustainable future. And thank you.
Thank you, Frankie. Let's go over to Skokwash next. Skokwash, I'd love if you could share a bit about the work you're doing to amplify the voices of Indigenous people and youth.
Yes, thank you. Yedikshin Wenwen, Hanshkwash Skokwash Lillian, Komshin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Skokwash. I'm from Komshin, also known as Lytton, here in British Columbia. I am Nickaklaam and Yakima. I'm really excited to be sitting here with all these fellow youth, but I do have to address that this room has become significantly less people from the first session. And so I think it's important that the folks here, thank you for staying. And when you do leave and you see other people, tell them that they do have to be in these sessions and listen to us. I think that is so critical. Now to share a little bit of my villain origin story, as I call it. So I mentioned that I'm from Lytton. If you're not aware of Lytton, it is about 4 hours north on Highway 1. And about 2.5 years ago now, it was engulfed by a forest fire. It burned 90% of the town down. And that was really, I call it a catalyst in my journey in climate policy. Before that, I was a climate justice coordinator, ensuring that intersectionality is prominent in the climate sector and talks, but I focused mainly on community engagement, working with community, just bringing awareness and providing that support. But since the fires, I've been more vocal and trying to be in these rooms. If you go down to the core of climate action, it is Indigenous ways of knowing. It is Indigenous science. And I think that is something that's not acknowledged enough. And what I'd also like to actually, speaking on Indigenous science and ways of knowing, as amazing this panel is, there are some perspectives missing. As a First Nations youth, and as residing in so-called Canada, there are no Métis or Inuit representation up on this table, and I think that is very much important as well. So a little bit of the work that I think having Indigenous perspectives, sorry. Actually, no, I take that back. I don't apologize. I did nothing wrong. Indigenous perspectives are super critical in these talks because we do not want to continue the legacy of colonialism. Having Indigenous perspectives within climate policy ensures that there will be sustainable change, and even more specifically for rural and remote communities. Lytton did not have the capacity to continue and update their climate policies, and now we're 2.5 years with no buildings, no structures rebuilt, and there's nothing, we see no path to that in the future yet. There's no capacity to apply for funding, and that's where we're starting to see the gaps. And I'm pretty sure Lytton is not the only community facing that as well. Within the international sphere, I can say that there has been very big strides to ensure that Indigenous perspectives are within the negotiations and the speakings. But again, it does come back down to capacity. There are not enough Indigenous people having the funding resources to attend these kind of conversations, and that's why we're left out. And that will only continue to grow gaps. We are in a climate crisis, and as youth, we've grown up in it. Our expertise is unmatched to academic. And I say that in a decolonized view of what we view expertise. Sorry, I'm a little bit emotional today. I guess just for some transparency here, Lytton is currently under evacuation and evacuation alerts. There are 5 wildfires there right now. Half my family is evacuated and the other half is waiting to hear. So yeah, it's a little distracted at the moment. And I think I'm going to steer with that actually for a bit. Youth are constantly Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth are constantly having to sacrifice. I love being in these conversations and I will continue to do so, but I am sacrificing being away from my family. I'm sacrificing supporting my community. And I would rather be home supporting, but I know that it is a privilege to sit up here and to sit with people who have influence within policy making, to hopefully make them feel a bit uncomfortable with my story to make real change. And that is our reality. It is our reality that we have to continually be uncomfortable and to hopefully hope that we can influence some change, because we don't have the power yet. We are constantly told that our voices are important, and yet we sit to a half-empty room from 40 minutes ago. So I guess just to conclude this, as I know I didn't ramble, but it feels like I did. I want to thank you all for showing that you have true passion to hearing youth. And thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn now to Marina. Marina, could you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing to create nature and climate solutions grounded in community and justice?
Sure, hi. Hi everybody, my name is Marina. I'm a climate justice activist. I've been an activist for over a decade. I am a scholar. I'm a Greek-Canadian settler here on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I've been to a lot of panels and a lot of events like these over the last couple years especially. And I wish I could say that I was surprised to see the attendance of the room definitely decline once the youth panel started. And thanks for pointing that out, Sunshine. But I am not surprised to see that. And you know, it's challenging to be in this space and to talk about the importance of recognizing young people, not just because of our age, but because we have real expertise and knowledge and wisdom to share. And the importance of that recognition actually being meaningful and not just a performative youth panel at the opening of an event that not very many people are going to come out and watch, but have that recognition lead to meaningful funding, lead to doors being open, lead to actual seats at the table, and also maybe lead to some invitations to come into our spaces, youth spaces, so that we don't always have to come out into non-youth spaces. And it's challenging to have to talk about that again, especially under skies that are clouded with wildfire smoke, and to have peers and community members and family being under evacuation order across this province that I call home, and in Yellowknife, and in Maui, and in far too many places around the world right now. It's challenging. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about how I got here. And I think that things like wildfires hit me really, really hard because I came to the climate movement through nature. I'm incredibly fortunate to live here in this corner of the world, to be a guest on this corner of the world where I have the ocean on my left and the mountains on my right and the forest, the rainforest, the temperate rainforest is behind me. How could I not love the natural world growing up here? How could I not make that jump from nature to climate action growing up here? But I was really surprised and disappointed when I attended my first climate conference to see that there weren't really a lot of people making that connection to nature. Where were the farmers, the indigenous leaders, the ecologists, the people that have that connection to the land, talking about that connection, that intrinsic, inignorable connection between nature and climate? Like, those people weren't there, and I was really disappointed about that. That led me to found Youth for Nature, which is a global youth-led organization, which really was an excuse for me to tackle two of my passions at the same time, that intrinsic connection between nature and climate, and meaningfully supporting young people to have agency over solutions for both nature and climate in ways, again, that goes beyond tokenistic or extractive relationships, but is youth-led, is peer-led, is grounded in justice, and looks like meaningful capacity building, meaningful funding, meaningful communities that are youth-run and led and are supporting each other to actually lead on solutions in our homes and in our communities on the ground. Youth for Nature is a global youth-led organization. It has a youth staff team and a network of over 15,000 young people from over 100 countries around the world. And it's just one of the many youth-led organizations that are leading the way in creating solutions on the ground with and by and for communities. That looks sometimes like engaging in events like these, that sometimes looks like engaging in policy. Youth for Nature collaborated with Youngo and the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, of which I believe there are also representatives of those groups here too, to create the first ever global youth statement on the term nature-based solutions, which is a global youth policy statement that calls out greenwashing and co-option that is often associated with that term nature-based solutions, and has been cited at COP26 and COP27, has been cited on the negotiation floor of COP15 by Bolivian negotiators, and has really been recognized by global and non-youth institutions as an important space in that policy conversation around NBS. Youth for Nature is also doing NBS justice-led, grounded, youth-led, nature-based solution work on the ground. Just this March, Youth for Nature launched Inuka, which is a youth-led nature-based solutions accelerator program working in Kenya with young people who are already doing restoration work, agroforestry work, climate-smart agriculture work in their communities, and providing them with meaningful resources to scale up that work. That looks like mentorship, that looks like skill building, that looks like 10 grand in funding for each youth team to actually take the work they're already doing in their communities, scale it up for biodiversity, but also for poverty alleviation, for food security purposes, for their own sustainable livelihoods, and really looking at how we can build nature solutions for climate, but that also integrate communities and integrate the wisdom and the knowledge that already exists within communities to build solutions that actually work for them and are led by them, and of course also help biodiversity in the ecosystems as well. So we're at GEF. This is the place where the money is, I have been told. And youth, despite leading the way, and despite me hearing lots of people talk about how youth are leading the way all the time, are chronically underfunded. Less than 1% of climate finance goes to young people. And I believe less than like 2% of all finance goes to climate. So the tiniest fraction of a tiny fraction are going to youth-led work to do climate work. I don't know what the stats are on nature finance. I wouldn't be surprised if it's even less money from nature finance going to youth than it is for climate. And I'm not surprised. Support for us often doesn't really go beyond an invitation to speak at an event, an unpaid invitation to speak at an event. There's a need for actors with power, with platforms, with resources. That includes all of you here, including me, I would say. We have some degree of power to even be in this space. There's a need for us to radically redistribute and redirect power. That looks like directing resources to groups that have been historically and systemically denied access to those resources, towards initiatives that intentionally work to redistribute power. And invitations to panels like these are really important, but more importantly, resource redistribution beyond panels like these are really incredibly important. Towards Indigenous-led work, Global South-led work, women, queer, youth-led work. And with the smoke of the wildfires that are in the air right now, we're running out of time, and I hope that can push us to be courageous this week. Thanks.
Thank you, Marina. I'm going to turn now to Sophia. Sophia, could you tell us a bit about the work you're doing with Threading Change?
For sure. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Sophia Yang. My Chinese name is Yang Ya Cheng, and I use she, her pronouns. And I want to zone in on my Chinese name there for a moment. Ya is my family name, pronounced Yang, but it's okay. We can say Yang. And Ya, which is half of Wen Ya, means sophisticated. And Cheng, the last part, which is half of Gong Cheng, means engineer. So my Chinese name translates directly to sophisticated engineer. And my parents got a loud-mouthed environmentalist. So I'm very sorry, I did not follow the path that you set out for me. But I tell you this story because I vividly remember when I was 11 years old, and I was reading an article interviewing Dave Suzuki at the time, who is my earliest role model, talking about what young people can do to raise awareness about global warming, it was called back then. This is 2007. And I remember pictures in this magazine spread, Owl, that was for preteens or teenagers about 11 to 13. And they had pictures of polar bears, they had pictures of light bulbs turning off and on, and they had pictures of forest fires burning. Now fast forward, I'm in my late 20s, so I feel like I'm kind of forging away from the youth sphere. But as forest fires rage on this week, and I haven't yet seen a polar bear in real life yet, but I'm thinking about the fires in our backyard, I remember back to that picture of the light bulb, and how when I was entering my journey as a climate or global warming activist or change maker, a lot of the actions we were discussing was very much on an individual level. Bike to work, take shorter showers, turn off the lights. And as I attended my first United Nations conference, COP24 in Poland, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, I realized that all these individual actions, while they bubble, the large systemic change is what's really impactful. But I didn't feel that my place as a young person so desperately wanting to make change stood any ground in a conference where it was largely inaccessible. I couldn't even access most of the negotiation rooms because I didn't have a party badge. I was merely an observer badge. And many of the youth press conference we did with Youngo, and as well as many other youth spaces, similar to this one, had dwindling attendance compared to many of the other panels at the same time. So I was determined because that year I had a very hard time at COP, being very interested in renewable energy, indigenous people's platforms, adaptation. I felt like a chicken running without a head, trying to go to all the negotiations and events, being denied, and then having to find another one. So when I attended COP25 in Madrid, I decided to go with a different approach. I was really interested in fashion from a perspective of styling and also just about sustainable fashion, but I couldn't find much information on it. So as I was on that plane from Vancouver to London, then to Madrid, I did a Control-F search of fashion at COP25, and I found 1 out of 500 side events on fashion. With an industry that accounts for about 10% of global CO2 emissions, with some predictions saying that it could surpass all airline emissions trajectory by the year 2050, 70 million barrels of oil used annually to produce polyester fiber, which, by the way, is a microplastic, and a lot of this wastewater being untreated and going to various different global south countries, Bangladesh, Vietnam, China, India, Cambodia, polluting their waters. It was shocking to me how little we're talking about an industry that all of us relate to so dearly. Because I don't see anyone naked right now. Maybe that'd be a security breach. A decision we have to make every day is fashion, the clothes we wear. And whether you think you relate to fashion or not, it definitely has a common thread within our life. And when I was at the UN Fashion Charter 1-year anniversary event, I look up on that stage, and the first thing they said is, today we're here representing the global fashion industry. And I thought, that's interesting, because there's only one visible minority up on that stage. There was no young people up on that stage, from what I could tell. I don't want to be judgmental. And it was all representative of major banks and also major fashion brands. And they're saying, today we're here with a landmark agreement for the first time industry and government working together to reduce emissions drastically in the fashion industry. If that is the case, then why are these large fashion conglomerates that are exactly responsible for the gross amount of climate emissions from fashion up on that stage saying they're gonna be doing that work? By them sitting there and making these statements, it doesn't really mean anything. It's more so like if they went up there and said, look at me and all the damage I've done, and also this bottle of water that I spilled, but look at me cleaning it up and how amazing it is. And all this funding was going towards fast fashion brands that have billions of dollars in revenue, and nothing for garment workers that were also not represented up on that stage. So that day forward, I was determined to do something about this issue. So when I came back from COP and had much more free time because of COVID, I launched Spreading Change. We are a youth-led, for youth, by youth, ethical fashion, not-for-profit organization and startup, with our mission being the 6 Fs, which is a feminist, fossil fuel-free fashion future, working on embedding the intersectionality and also justice aspects of fashion through creative events, storytelling, innovation, research and policy processes, and also our latest series, our global clothing swaps. And having diverted almost 500,000 tons of clothing from landfills across the globe, having done clothing swaps in New Delhi, Amsterdam, Hong Kong, soon New York for New York Climate Week, Accra in Ghana, Nairobi in Kenya, Quito in Ecuador, and also Calgary, Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, it's dawned on me that we're building a movement of young people that recognize that this resource with fashion is something that we seem to think is infinite. If you imagine how many articles of clothing you have right now, count socks, underwear, shoes, it's likely that we all have more than 200. Now total that by the number of people in the global north that probably have that amount of fashion, and think about, how do we actually recycle our clothes? This is a question that I thought of ages ago when we talked about recycling juice boxes and paper, aluminum cans, but there never seemed to be any consensus on how fashion is actually recycled. And there isn't. When I first started talking about wanting to work in fashion, I reached out to the Ministry of Environment, reached out to the local Vancouver government to talk about fashion recycling. And what I realized is a strong ping pong of responsibilities. It's a municipal issue, they said. Well, actually, no, it's a provincial issue, they said. We'll have a task force working on this topic, and nothing has happened, and it's already been 3.5 years. And to that I say, I implore all of us to think about from a decision of how we wear our clothes, how we show up in our clothes today, and also thinking about what different mechanisms can we support youth working on these issues that a lot of us have ignored. Fashion is an industry that has gone on far too long, polluting the earth, not paying garment workers properly, and a severe lack of equity as well when it comes to labor and justice. And echoing Marina's sentiments, as a youth-led organization, funding has continuously been one of the biggest struggles with project-to-project based funding and many, many barriers set up. So today, with all of us in this room, and I really thank you for being here, I would love to find continuous supportive ways for us to work within this industry and see how we can reimagine a circular economy together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Now I'm going to turn to Ray. And Ray, I'm hoping you can share about the work that you've been doing with youth-led communities, sustainability, and wildlife conservation.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction. My name is Ray. I'm from Tanzania, and I am part of the largest youth environmental education and humanitarian program called Roots and Shoots. which started in Tanzania about 32 years ago. But also I oversee programs at the Pan-African Youth Union, the Office of the Secretary General, which is the focal agency for youth for the African Union. So with the Roots and Shoots, it's very integrating the work that we do in collaboration with the Pan-African Youth Union. And basically with the Roots and Shoots, the core objective has been to create and have more compassionate citizens. And the reason for this is that the greatest danger to our world right now is apathy. So we have so much knowledge, we have so much understanding of things, but then there's that sense of not caring, or maybe thinking just it's a responsibility of someone else or some other institution, or some other people should be doing it. And so I wish to share some of the reflections around the work that we do with youths. And so number one, we have youth itself. So youth itself is an issue. The reason is youth are seen holistically as homogeneically, but youth are very different. We're not just a single package. We're different as a demographic, that we have different aspirations, we have different needs, and then we have different capabilities as well. And then the second issue, of course, which we've all been hearing about, is climate change. Now, the conversation has been youth independently, and then there's been climate change, but it's youth and climate change all at once. And so one of the issues that we've been doing, we've been working with communities through a model called KCA, which is knowledge, compassion, and action. So number one is knowledge, and knowledge cannot be seen lightly, in a sense that we've had a lot of science, but then we've had sometimes science that is for scientists. The question has been, how do we communicate the sophisticated research and science and translate it into really a common man and a common citizen, and even young people? The second thing that the KCA model has been trying to do is how we are seeing very growing interest, lack of interest in young people addressing issues of climate change, basically. And the reason has been, even young people we have our priorities. We're looking for career as well. We're looking for, a means to develop a life. Now, the question has been, how can sustainability really be that missing coupling to really make sustainable jobs a reality? What does it mean? How does it happen? And so for the past about 30 years, so Roots and Shoots has been introducing a mechanism to really understand, like, people are not, poaching wildlife for fun. They're doing it because it's urge for survival. They're not, cutting down trees for fun. It's because of urge for survival. So a means of earning a living, a means of surviving has to be introduced. So most of our initiatives has been to introduce economic viable alternatives for communities, but also at the same time ensuring that we create a generation of young people that are compassionate and really understand that the resources that we have, they will not be here forever if we really utilize them unsustainably. And so the communities themselves and the young people to really participate in restoration, in protection, in also conservation. And so I wish to also reflect on the two challenges, one of which is the issue of youth in decision-making spaces. This is where the Pan-African Youth Union element comes in. So unlike most of the times we've heard, the voice of the youth. Now, the good news about the Pan-African Youth Union, at least for the context of Africa, we have the framework. I mean, the youth voice in a space of decision-making is not quite an issue, I would say, in the sense that we have the African Youth Charter, which really mandates and allows for youth to really be in the table with decision makers as well, and provides a framework for developmental process on youth. Now, the challenge has been, now we have a mandate to be on the table to really propose solutions and policy. But then we've been aspirants. We barely know some of the specific solutions, so we've not known how to really, and it has been an excuse for most part, like we cannot speak a conversation with the decision makers, the politicians. We cannot have the same conversation with our own youth as well. So the program that we're working on next is something into how can really youth be equipped with relevant knowledge to really be able to propose compelling solutions in a manner that can really be actionable. And also the second part is the issue of finance, like we've heard. So there's the issue of youth, and then there's the issue of climate finance for youth. And so while we also recognize that youth have challenges, but also have great potential as well. So among the work we've been doing has been around protecting wildlife, also conserving environments, including restoration and conservation of marine and coastal ecosystems. Also massive tree planting. The programs is with, are around 68 countries in the world and all the 54 countries in Africa. So there's a lot of work, but the challenge that I wish to explore with that both is how do we prompt that youth engagement into conservation and sustainability. And so there is a gap into how we communicate with young people. How do we make provisions for really young people to tap their potential? We were having a conversation with some of the colleagues that young people are sometimes like ChatGPT. Without a proper prompt, you may not get the required outcome. So youth need that kind of context as well to be able to really be efficient. And also, how are we looking at financial inclusion for youth and climate finance for youth? Definitely that's a tough spot, but there is a lot of hope, and it will be interesting to expand this conversation. I thank you for now.
Thank you, Ray. And then finally, I want to turn, last but not least, to Nena. Nena was going to share about some of the work she's done around legal advocacy and education to advance social movements.
Yeah. Well, first I'll just ask you all to go back in time with me to 2016. I was 13, I was in middle school, and I cared about the climate crisis. I didn't know what to do about it, and so one day I decided to start taking individual plastic bottles out of the trash in my middle school cafeteria, which seated all 200 people in my 6th and 7th grade classes, and place them in the recycling myself, using my bare hands. And as you can imagine, this made me really, really popular amongst my peers. So this was 2016. Towards the end of that school year, there was a forest fire in my maternal grandparents' community in rural Appalachia, East Tennessee. And Sunshine, you talked a little bit about rural and remote communities, and this is definitely one of them. There's no cell service there, and it was really devastating. It was incredibly difficult for that community to rebuild. A few months later, so I've moved on to the 8th grade now, there was a serious flood following a monsoon rainstorm in my paternal grandparents' community in northern India. And something about watching those two disasters take place just a few months apart, both in impoverished communities halfway across the world from each other, made me realize that a single plastic bottle, even 100 plastic bottles, wasn't gonna be the change that we needed. And yeah, Marina, you talked about redistribution of power and redistribution of resources, and I very quickly realized as I started high school that we needed mechanisms to achieve that if we were going to address the climate crisis. And so that is what eventually brought me into the world of climate litigation as a way to make polluters pay for what they've done, make governments pay for their inaction and rectify it. Today is all about youth and indigenous and local knowledge, and I think climate litigation is a wonderful area because it requires the combination of those knowledge bases and more conventional scientific knowledge bases. To build an effective climate case, you need two things. You need proof that climate change is harming the plaintiffs, right? And that requires listening actively to youth and to local and indigenous and affected communities. And then you need scientific evidence, strong scientific evidence that links the defendant to the harm that's being done, right? That proves climate change is real, that proves that it is the source of the harm, and that proves that whoever you are suing is responsible. And so even just those two things require really effective communication and collaboration between folks like us and folks who are at the top of the scientific field. So I want to just run through 3 cases that really inspire me as effective examples of this kind of collaboration and connection between different knowledge bases. The first, and if you've heard of them, hopefully you have, then yeah, feel free to raise your hand or give a wave. So the first is a case that an indigenous Peruvian farmer brought against a German utility company. Saul, yes, Saul Luya versus RWE. So this is a case, this farmer's home is threatened by glacial flooding. There's a lake up the hill from his home that has really swelled in size because of melting glaciers. It's now at a really high risk for severe flooding, and it would completely wipe away his village if that were to happen. So he's suing this utility company for proportional damages. A modest sum, it's about 18,000 US dollars, 17,000 euro, proportional to their contribution to climate change. And there's a lot of really sophisticated attribution science that Rosina alluded to earlier today that is building the evidentiary basis for this case, but there's also a lot of indigenous input, and Saul, the plaintiff, likes to invoke the mountain spirits that his community finds sacred in Peru, and he has this amazing quote that really catapulted the case into international recognition. He said, "The lakes are the tears of the mountains, and justice has heard the mountains crying." And this was what made the case what it is today. I think it's a beautiful combination of science and indigenous knowledge working together to support this case. The next case I want to talk about is brought against Australia by indigenous residents of the Torres Strait Islands. This case centers cultural loss and biodiversity loss. There is science that it relies on from the IPCC that proves climate change is real, that proves sea levels are rising as a result. But if you read the complaint, it is pages and pages and pages of testimony from all generations of this community who lives on these islands, talking about what will happen to their cultural practices if these fish species go extinct, to connect to Ray's talk earlier. What will happen if they are not able to pass these traditions down to the next generation? And it's a beautiful combination, again, of science and indigenous and youth knowledge supporting this case, which was actually won against the UN Human Rights Commission, or in the Human Rights Commission against Australia. And then the third case I'll mention has been in the news a lot in the past week or two. I don't know if people have read about Held versus Montana, youth plaintiffs, in the United States, who again rely on science to make the case that their state has been really negligent in its approach to dealing with climate change, to paint a clear picture of what will happen if the state doesn't change course. But also who argue that youth should really be a protected class when we talk about climate and environment, and who invoke the really unique moral authority that young people have to make this case that our generation and future generations must be protected. So I brought up these 3 examples because I think in each of these cases, the combination of youth, local, indigenous knowledge, and scientific knowledge has been not only the right thing to do. Often we have these youth panels and we bring in youth voices because it's the right thing to do, but it's also been the strategic thing to do. It has enabled these cases to win. And I just really, if you take one thing away from me today, I want it to be that it's not only right, but also strategic to combine scientific, conventional knowledge with youth, traditional, local knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Nena, and thank you all for being willing to share your experiences with us and give us a chance to learn from your expertise. It strikes me as I listen to all of your stories that one thread through them is, despite the fact that you're often facing what seems like a pretty despairing situation out in the world, despite the fact that the personal burdens can be so high, right, of engaging around this, and despite the fact that you've really had to fight for your seats at the table, right, that each of you have, in your own way, found a path forward. And I'll say, maybe again, as a mom, right, with even younger, with really young ones at home, so many youth that I talk to today are immobilized by the state of the world, and I'd love and welcome just to hear your thoughts on what would you tell youth who are seeing the world as it is and who are looking for ways to act and engage like you were back in middle school, right? What advice do you have for them?
I can jump in here. I actually have some advice for the grown-ups in the room. In panels like these and other panels when youth are speaking, sometimes it does come out as anger and angry and just full-on passion. And sometimes grown-ups are very dismissive of that. And that is, actually grown-ups are very dismissive of all our feelings. And you need to lean into the uncomfortability that this is our truth. The truth is that our childhood, our young adulthood had been taken up by the climate crisis. And now we're being told that basically our whole lives will be 20, 30, 50 years from now, we're still going to be fighting this. And so that is our whole lives. So it will come off as angry. I know I'm pissed off right now. And actually, if you follow me on social media, you'll see that all week leading up to the GEF Assembly, I said that I'm coming here pissed off because my home is on fire. Our planet is on fire, and that's our reality, and we are allowed to be angry. So when we get loud with you, just be like, okay, because I bet at one point you were angry too. But I do some work with the government, and you can't be angry in those conversations. I understand that. But don't lose your spark. So that's my advice to the grown-ups.
I can jump in. Despair is rational. It makes complete sense. It's not an unrational thing to be feeling. It's not an illogical thing to be feeling. It means that it means that we're empathetic, that we're paying attention, that we're connected to what's happening. Despair is also a strategic tactic that can be employed by bad faith actors, by fossil fuel executives, by big polluters to stifle change and to stifle action. I'll say that again, despair is a strategic tactic employed by the people that are setting the forest on fire to stifle change. I think we need to feel that despair when it comes up, because trust me, it doesn't do any good to just ignore it and then to fall into a big pit of seemingly endless despair, especially when you're stuck in your home because you can't leave due to a combination pandemic and smoky skies. So I think you need to feel it. And know that is logical and rational to feel that. But then I would, just to echo you, Sunshine, let that despair take us into anger. Get angry. This shouldn't be happening. This is unjust. Get angry and get organized. Yeah.
I just want to add on to this idea of what are the strategic tactics that are employed to keep us down. And I think despair is one of them, and I think isolation is also one of them. So advice to young people would be just to get involved in a community of people that are organized or trying to get organized. That was the most transformative thing for me and Frankie. I know you talked about that feeling of I'm not alone anymore, and I think that's really one of the most radically hopeful feelings that there is it helps you to recognize your collective power, which is especially important for young people who are systematically disempowered at school and just by virtue of their age. So yeah, find community, find organized community, or organize your community is my advice to young people who are wanting to get involved but dealing with despair.
So my advice, basing on what I've learned through all these engagements, is taking no for an answer as young people. And then now, young people to come in a position of strength instead of coming in from a position of liability or vulnerability, because that way sometimes we are not considered as serious. And so also another advice to also governments and organizations is engaging youth as equal partners. In that way, we can explore both the potential and also have an understanding of the vulnerabilities that the young people have. And from that perspective of coming in from a position of strength, we are now youth to youth collaborating the Roots and Shoots and the PYU, working on a solution we've dubbed Jawabu. Jawabu is answer for Swahili. So what it seeks to do is to provide a safe space for young people to really develop solutions to climate change as an opportunity, but also bridge another gap that young people are hard to be financed because of probably we may not be just as organized or have great solutions. So also the platform to be an opportunity where all the knowledge and all the mentorship can really guide into solution development, but also innovation sometimes goes through a series of errors, and then as young people sometimes we are scared to be judged. But in innovation, there's no failing. There's just less progress and there's more progress. So it's a continuous process. Keyword, taking no for an answer is a sin.
I have 3 pieces of advice for young people that I wish I knew when I started, but I think this also applies to older generations. The first one is find your lime amongst a sea of lemons. When I finally realized that my passion was fashion, lame rhyme, but also for circular economy solutions and textile recycling, I zoned in on that passion so much that I felt like I couldn't stop. And I know we talk about intersectionality a lot, and I love intersectionality. It's the essence of our organization. But finding that niche to focus on fashion and understanding how we can help Global South communities that the Global North is used as a dumping ground with their textile waste is something that fuels me every day. And if I didn't realize that, I would still be trying to figure out which aspect I want to zone in on all this time. That's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice I would say is collaboration, not competition. I realized this, that having grown up in China and then immigrated to Canada when I was 8 years old, that there's this dichotomy between the East and the West, and also with the American dream, where sometimes here in the Western world, we're very proud, very individualistic. We want to be the knight in the shining armor. We want recognition. We want to be the one that's starting a new initiative. But find those in your corner that's within your active allies and also your passive allies, and find those that are already doing similar work to you, and see if you can collaborate, if you can band together, if you can discuss what's worked well and what hasn't worked well, and see if you can create something that is stronger as a unity rather than competing with each other and moving the dial in the opposite directions, because we really don't have time to stall due to the climate catastrophe we're in right now. And a third thing I would say, I would tell my younger self and also young people, is pick low-hanging fruit. I remember when I went to the first couple climate protests that I was in, that everyone was talking about divestment. It was a buzzword. And I tried to go to a few different focus groups that already had a lot of people working in this space, and I didn't feel like I could contribute as much. So when I found out about the intricacies of the fashion industry and how terrible it is, there weren't many organizations, people talking about it, especially not from the recycling side or the human rights aspect at that time. So I decided to zone in on this one piece that not many people were working on. And today, within another gig that I have, working with Canopy Planet, we're working to transform the viscose supply chain. Viscose is a substitute for silk. Because of this low-hanging fruit aspect, we've been able to engage with the majority, in fact, 97% of major viscose producers around the world to ensure they're not sourcing from ancient endangered forests when creating viscose. So to summarize, the 3 pieces of advice is pick low-hanging fruit, find your lime amongst your lemons, and collaboration, not competition.
I'm going to chime in here at the end. I think when it comes to despair, in addition to finding your community, I think one thing that's really helped me manage my own despair is actually finding a mentor who I felt like they truly understood me and truly wanted what was best for me and was there to help me achieve my dreams. And it's not always easy to find a mentor, but my advice to young people who are looking to take action is to enter into a community and then see if there's anyone in that community who's willing to mentor you and to helping you achieve your dreams. A good mentor can really open a lot of doors for people, and for those of you in the audience who have the capacity to mentor someone who's younger and someone who wants to enter this field, I invite you to also think about giving back to the younger generation and mentoring someone who is trying to enter this field.
Thank you for that. And so, Frankie, maybe building off of your point and then connecting back Sunshine to your advice to this crowd, right? To the extent that there are folks who are looking for ways to support youth leaders, what advice do you have for them, right? What are the things that they could most valuably do? And maybe just as important, what are the things they should stop doing, right? Would love your thoughts.
I'm just going to say we're going to go in the same order, so I can jump in here again. I think advice for the first one is you have to fund youth, fund young people, offer honorariums. We are sitting up here, so we should be paid for while we're sitting up here. Every youth who speaks up, I mean, considering inflation, considering everything that was currently going on with our economy, youth are the least paid demographic on this planet. And that's going to it's just looking like prices are going up. What should stop? As an Indigenous youth, and I'm very proud to call myself Indigenous, but I'm also just First Nations. Having to come up here and speak on an Indigenous perspective is not inclusive at all. Indigenous is a very broad term with a very diverse community and communities. So putting that responsibility on one person, on one youth, is unfair, is unjust. So going into the future, if you are inviting an Indigenous person on your panel, specifically a youth, let them know have multiple Indigenous peoples, have those different perspectives. Because I only have the First Nations perspective. And there are a lot of voices missing if you're saying Indigenous. Thank you.
This just belongs in the conversation about mentorship, but I just would say it's you have to invest your time. Like, yes, pay youth, and then also build relationships with youth. Don't just fly people out and elevate their voices, which is great, but actually follow up and offer just your time to talk through what they're thinking about, what issues matter to them, what you've learned in your career. I think that this is something that is lacking from a lot of adult allies, is even when we are paid, we're often not invested in that less material way. But for me, the adults who've invested a lot of their time in me are the people who I really credit with everything I've been able to do in my short life thus far. So, yeah. And then the other thing I would say is offering voting and decision-making power to youth. Like, there's a lot you can do with youth while still evading accountability to youth. So instituting mechanisms that will make you or the organization you represent accountable to youth input, and usually that looks like, you know, youth voting power in some form, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think there's a very strong role of mentorship. So speaking from my context, at least from Tanzania at some point, we've never had a situation where maybe in school, like, you can engage with your teacher, because a teacher is seen as a, you know, military commander. I mean, you just do stuff, you get your marks, you get to class, and then you're off. So that whole sense about, you know, speaking to someone elderly as a mentor has not been part of very common culture, especially for most parts of Africa. But I think I would wish to welcome the colleagues who have really, you know, exerted in career to really reach out to young people, like some of my colleagues said, and understanding also that young people may be shy, may not know what we want sometimes, but I think that constant conversation really builds up confidence, and you should be able to see that how to be able to support some of these youth. So I think it's important to reach out and connect with young people, and then that way it builds the confidence in young people, and then the engagement really starts off from there.
I think one thing that we've kind of lost in society is the art of facilitation. And when I say the word facilitation, I really mean the ability for us to hold space for one another. And I think, like, if I could give one advice to anyone who wants to work with youth, it's to learn how to facilitate safe spaces for people. Because at this point, I feel like youth and like the older generation, we're at this point where we're both villainizing each other, when, as Sunshine said, we're on the same side. So why is it that we're doing that? How can we build a space where we can have constructive dialogue with each other to get to a decision into a path to a sustainable future? So I guess long story short, learn how to facilitate safe spaces where people can come and actually share their full selves and their full thoughts. And I guess that also ties into intentionality. When you work with youth, we want to know that you are truly trying to invest with us, and you're not trying to tokenize us and just tick a box off and be like, oh, okay, we've covered the youth perspective, on to the next thing.
Maybe I'll go quickly because I have a tangible resource that I was involved in that I want you all to write down and go look up. And I'm sorry if I kind of mix up the order of the words of the titles, but the University of Waterloo, there's a Center for Innovation in Youth there, who's run by former youth leaders who are now scholars and doing actual research on what is the tangible impact of young people in social movements and in organizations for change. Spoiler alert, there's like actual neuroscience related reasons why it's catalytic for young people to be involved in social movements. So go check out that work. And I was recently working with them to put out a report on the state of funding for youth-led movements. This was specifically in so-called Canada, but I think the lessons from that report will be applicable beyond these borders as well. And what youth-led work needs from funders. Some of those things look like funding for wellness, especially activists. This also looks like unrestricted funding and long-term funding, and funding that's actually sizable enough to be able to support livelihoods for young people, beyond just project-to-project based funding or honorarium to honorarium based funding. This looked like including young people in the decision-making spaces where funding decisions are being made, on the boards of foundations, for example, advisory councils that actually have power and are not just performative. And this also looked like foundations advocating for young people even when we're not in the room. I think that's especially important because there are so many spaces that are so opaque and very, very inaccessible for young people, where a lot of these decisions are actually being made. Philanthropy in particular, philanthropy in Canada in particular, is incredibly opaque, very inaccessible. You need to meet X, Y, and Z, like impossible standard in order to even get into that room. So I think it's incredibly important for there to be allies and accomplices within the funding atmosphere and infrastructure that are advocating for young people and meaningful support, unrestricted support, trust-based support for young people, and trusting that we will be able to take that funding and use it in the way that best serves our communities and therefore best serves the movement. And I actually don't like talking about funding all the time, believe it or not. It's not my favorite thing to talk about. I would love to talk about almost anything else. But this is the GEF Assembly, right? Like I said before, you are the people with the money, I've been told. We have a representative for a foundation sitting right next to me right now. And there's just no flow. There's no financial flow towards young people. And what that means is that people with relative privilege, who often look and sound like me, are the ones that get to sit on these tables most often, and the young people that are actually at the forefront of these issues and cannot afford to volunteer, cannot afford to do something for visibility, are left out, are not invited, are left out of the spaces, and are not able to actually leverage their knowledge to lead on solutions. So it's critical that that financial flow starts flowing a lot faster, and I know that there's something that each and every one of you in this room can do about that.
Thank you. I know we have both other youth leaders in this room as well as others who hopefully can be part of this dialogue. So I'd love to open it up for either questions or comments if you want to just approach the microphones. Please, in the back there.
Always time is not very enough. This morning or afternoon? Oh, still good morning to everybody. Thank you for this chance. First of all, I would like to congratulate all presenters. Yeah, it was very informative. Myself, I have few recommendations. One is you need to invest more in strengthening the national youth forums. The national youth forums. You see, there are some spaces, some chairs, we don't find people here because in Canada we have 7 million youth, and about 10% are unemployed. We need to see them here. Why they are not here? Because we don't have the chairman of Canada Youth Network. Maybe we see it is not a big issue, but I see we need strong national and regional youth forums. That's one. But two, I see that as international community, we need to know that GEF has approved the Gustavo Fonseca Youth Leadership Program. Youth, you should feel proud of that. So the global community is concerned about the youth. The problem now is how do we increase the synergy among the youth across nation, across different region? We need to see a very strong youth network in Africa, youth network in Asia, and we need to see them in these international forums, actively engaged to deliver. Because otherwise, the sustainability will not be there. Because once I read the report from Gustavo Fonseca, he once said, if you spend money to youth, you are not merely spending, you are investing for the future. Our sustainability is endangered if we don't invest in the youth. But the last request on youth group and the indigenous groups, we have the so-called GEF CSO network. It has a number of organizations in it. We need to see you in synergies. Join hands with the CSO network. Please join hands. The more we are in synergy, the more we can reach more people. I understand that. But the last remark is about the livestock community across the developing countries. We have this youth and women and the so-called indigenous people. So far in the villages, they are raising the local cows, the local chickens, whatever, what they are doing as pastoralists. The local farmers, they have no one to guide them. I can give you an example in Tanzania, the number 2 in terms of the number of local cows in Africa, 33 million local cows. They move from south to east, west to east, north to south, only in search of the so-called cattle feed and water. And the most affected are the youth and the women. So please, let us have a special program for them. And the other thing is, how many youth are aware of what we are doing now? So we need to interpret all our youth programs into simple languages and disseminate down to the grassroots. And please, feel proud. You may see the venue is very few people here, but like myself and others, we represent networks, forums that has so many people behind us. So we are together. Don't feel that you are alone. No, we are together. The leaders of this global community are with youth. Everywhere we are in meeting, we speak about the youth, the women, how do we involve them? Because if GEF and others don't involve youth in the programs against climate change or environment conservation, then we are going nowhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did anybody want to respond or no? Okay, maybe next question or comment.
Yes, hello. Thank you. I just want to follow up on that excellent remark we just heard. My name is Yasmin Biro-Kurtman. I'm with the GEF Secretariat. And I am so glad that you are all here today speaking to us. And I just want to say that, 25, 30 years ago, I was also a youth leader concerned about the future of this planet. And yes, it's been a very difficult journey to get here, and unfortunately not the best, I would say, outcomes as I had hoped for when I was a youngster, working on these issues. But still a lot has happened, a lot of improvement in many ways. You just mentioned, for example, the court case in Montana. One of the reasons why there was success in that court case was because in the 70s, there was an environmental movement in the US which actually ended up causing a handful of states, including Montana, to change their constitution called Green Amendments so that it became a constitutional right of a Montana citizen to have a safe and clean environment. And because of that, this year, or the last couple of years, this court case actually went forward and there was success. So it pays to be angry, it pays to be organized, and it pays to say something, right? So the comments that you made really resonated with me. You you said as advice to young people, get angry, get organized, get involved, speak up, cooperate, collaborate, and not compete with each other. And I think that we have to take all that to heart, we meaning institutions like the GEF, and support those activities. And I'm so happy that our CEO fully understands that and has given us the directive, as was mentioned before, with the Gustavo Fonseca Fund, but with also other initiatives to support the youth. And I hear you about the funding, because when I was a young person trying to get to a conference like this to talk about our issues or to support or to learn more about what's going on in the world and how to make a difference, one needed the funding to travel from one place to the other, to survive for a week, somewhere to find food. As a student, it's not so easy, right? So we totally get that. Unfortunately, the multilateral processes are quite slow, and they're kind of gigantic and hard to change. But we are here for change. And I think the emphasis for this GEF Assembly, as we were told, is about change. So if we can make that change happen, I think that'll be great. So my question to you is, I heard a couple of recommendations for us to follow as people who have maybe a small chance to make a difference. One was the youth need to be equipped with relevant knowledge so they can make a contribution. I think that's very important. In fact, the GEF is right now looking to introduce some training for the youth to take advantage of on various issues. We're just starting to figure out how to finance that, because it's not something that we ordinarily do as the GEF. We're also trying to help youth travel from one place to another to attend events like this, so that's actually, but what else could we do? So when you say equipped with relevant knowledge, what do you exactly mean, and what would be helpful to you in a more practical way? That would be one question. And then the other is, how can we offer voting and decision-making power to youth, right? That was another request that came. What are some specifics that you can tell us? Do you want to be a part of the GEF Council? I don't know. Do you want to be an observer at the GEF Council? There is the GEF CSO network. Do you want a specific youth seat in that network, for example? Do you want a separate council for the youth that maybe we can, convene remotely twice a year as webinars or something like that, where we can collect the opinions, voices of the youth from around the world, because it's not very easy for everyone to travel, obviously, and the carbon footprint is very high, right? So it would be much easier to use technology if we can. So these are some thoughts, and I just wanted some guidance from you, specific guidance from you to tell us, and if you can't think of it right now, please tell us later. We're on the internet, WhatsApp and all of that, so you can communicate with us. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for your question and comment. I think this is exactly what I wanted to touch on. So I think in terms of improvements, I would really appreciate it if we could have more transparency around selection processes for attending certain events and assemblies. And I say that because I'm not exactly sure how I was reached out to, or who found me, or who recommended me to speak. But I think what tends to happen in a lot of these forums is that you tend to get something known as the superstar youth. Sometimes it starts to be a certain group of young people that are always at these panels saying sometimes the same things, but it's a lack of opportunity for other young people, sometimes much younger young people that are below the age of 20, that get to be in these spaces. And in some circumstances, as these notions start to get repetitive, it also becomes very mind-boggling for us to have to repeat these things time and time again, sometimes even the same individual doing so and not seeing the changes created. So transparency around selection processes will be fantastic. And that includes Black, Indigenous, people of color, and also LGBTQ plus communities as well. Another thing is, I think the youth seat in the network is imperative. While there's a lot of merit and attentiveness and appreciation for creating a separate youth council, I definitely think young people at the table surrounded by folks such as yourself that have been through this process, knowing how frustrating it can be to always just be seen as the young table, the youth panel, the one that's siloed over there. It doesn't feel great to also preach to the same choir of youth time and time again when we can directly go to the source of some of these issues. So I think a youth seat in the network is imperative. And also, I really want to champion, we really want to champion, I should say, youth perspective in almost every panel and every setting within the GEF and other conferences as well. And I felt this so many times attending the COP process, for example. This is Youngo, this is the youth table, this is a youth network, and I didn't feel like what we were saying was being taken seriously time and time again. And access to places. Don't segregate us with this is a party badge, this is the observer badge. You have to pay a premium price to get to this networking event. You have to be a senior executive staff to get to that event. Because I experienced that at many events where I thought I was having full access to the event and it felt like I was only able to access a quarter of it. Those are some tips on top of my head. I'm sure my fellow panelists have more, but we'll be more than happy to send you more information, email some of our thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Since I'm the one who said voting and decision making, I'll respond very quickly because I'm so excited that there's so many people who have questions back there. I think yes to everything you proposed, and I think the truth is you know better, certainly better than I do, where the top level decisions are made. And so it's wherever that is within the bureaucratic structure is where we should have youth votes. And it shouldn't just be one youth representative. Adults have the luxury of conferring with each other and speaking with colleagues about what the best steps forward are. Youth should have that luxury as well. You know, a separate youth panel is always fine, but it needs to have as much decision-making power as the adults in the room. Or even just 2 youth representatives is better than 1. Give people a community of colleagues and peers to confer with.
Just to quickly add on to what has been said about like a youth panel or youth representatives, this is on a global scale. There are 7 sociocultural regions, and each of those regions have indigenous people and have indigenous youth. If there is not a youth representative, and an indigenous youth representative from all of those, that is a very big gap, and that can continue the legacy of colonialism if that is not filled.
I'll just add one last thought. I think some of the best programs that I've seen that engage with youth are designed by youth for youth.
So I see we've got, I think, a long queue of questioners. We have about 20 minutes left in this session, and I want to make sure I do leave some time for our panelists to offer any closing thoughts. So please, it would be great if you could keep your comments or questions brief.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is Sanu from the GEF Assembly Network. First of all, I appreciate the so brilliant presentation and the thoughtful ideas. So one of the situation I see, we need young men's empowerment because there is only one young man out of several. So that we need to see. I myself, still I am a young man because last 25 years, my age did not increase. I remain within this. Okay, now come to my point is the youth, you are the future of tomorrow. The leadership in you will be leading the kind of world the upcoming days. So we need to invest, we need to support, and we need to see how they grow up. To make it happen, the policy need to support. And from the GEF network, every country, we have one youth focal point. There are GEF focal points, indigenous people focal point, gender focal point, and there is also one youth focal point. So you need to be mainstreamed there. That is one of the ways. Youth organizations, youth network, of course, they will survive, they will continue. But if you are working with us, then we can learn from you, and we can share you what is happening, and you can come to the regional level status, you can have global status that helps you to continue more support to the global development. So this is one. Second point is, what is your particular recommendation to the GEF? Because you have seen there is a fund, Gustavo, there are many other things are happening. Today you are here because of the GEF has something great expectation from the youth. So kindly make concrete one recommendation to the GEF, how you want to see the future. Thank you very much.
I would just like to make a comment on that first statement that you made about this one man sitting up here. There's no trans representation up here. There's no two-spirited representation up here. And actually, this is the first panel that I've sat on with majority women appearing. So, and we're at the GEF Assembly, which is finance, like it's focused on financing, which is a male-dominated sector. So the fact that there are mainly women sitting up here, I think that is a pretty amazing thing.
Okay, let's take our next question.
Thank you so much. I would like to congratulate all the young and bright young people, young leaders, and also GEF to open the GEF Assembly with young people's session first. So it is an indication that global community, the world political discourse is considering youth's voice very important. So this is one thing. Thank you, Jeff. And as a member country of GEF, I'm here. My name is Farhina Ahmed. I work in the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change as secretary, the top policymaker level. So from my perspective, what I feel, I attended last COP27, where I felt that the IPCC report, the science of the IPCC report should be reached each and every citizen, global citizen of this planet. And also the UNCBD COP15 of biodiversity, where the concern raised that almost 10 lakhs of species, biodiversity, are endangered. So we need to restore them. So these kinds of science and information should reach to each and every global citizen. That means youth. They all should know. So I believe, as a policymaker and the top manager of the ministry, I believe a systemic approach is very important. Through education, primary, secondary, tertiary, every level, we need to give that information and to reach out the people. And also, I feel that this is the era of materialism, the mechanization, and we are the product of, the materialistic society. And yet, our lifestyle, everything is so unsustainable, and the consumption of resources are very unsustainable. So not only the biodiversity, not only the environment, if we want to make a real change, we need to think a very sustainable lifestyle for youths, for every people. Because the morning session I was listening, the most important information regarding ocean is the ocean is providing 50% of the oxygen of this planet. So if the health of the ocean is damaged or polluted by plastic and other human intervention, what will happen to our survival? The whole humanity, the ecosystems are in danger. So that must be communicated to each and every citizen and youth. So making a shift from a materialistic point of view, a lifestyle, towards a sustainable lifestyle. That is a philosophical shift is required. So, and that only the new blood, young people can make. So we need to invest in youth. We need to prepare and develop our youth to make and save the planet. Because in last COP27, it was declared the emergency of the planetary emergency. And in the COP15, the endangered species has crossed more than 10 lakhs. So it is the high time to think everything very holistically and not very segregated and making someone champion and someone visible. It's a matter of survival, matter of philosophy, and matter of the humanity. Thank you all.
Can I see just maybe, but I can't quite tell how many folks we've got. I'm afraid, I'm fearing that we're not going to be able to accommodate all how many people do we have with? There's interpreters back here. Okay. So that's why there's extra people. Okay, that's what I wasn't sure about. Okay. Rosina, are we okay to continue a few minutes longer with questions? Okay, great. Please, the floor.
Thank you. You've all talked a lot about financing today, but as young people, you've noted yourselves that sometimes just getting your foot in the door can be the biggest issue, often because we lack the same credentials a lot of our mentors have. You talked about opacity with philanthropy, not being able to get a seat at the negotiation table, and also perhaps participating in climate litigation without having a full JD or passing the bar. Advice from one young person to another, what would you tell maybe your 19-year-old self, which is my age, for advice to just get your foot in the door? Thank you.
Well, I'm 20. And I spent the summer interning on climate litigation, and I was the only person in every room that I was in who didn't even have a bachelor's degree yet. And I felt pretty underqualified a lot of the time. And I don't really have advice to deal with that as much as just to say that coming out of this summer, I'm really glad I soldiered through it. And actually feel a lot more qualified now to talk about these things than I did 4 months ago. So I would just say stomach the feeling that you're not supposed to be there, the imposter syndrome, and you'll be glad you did later. And also align yourself with adults who are gonna reaffirm your presence and support your engagement. Yeah, I really relate is what I'm trying to say most of all. I really see you, yeah.
I think one of the biggest things for me, and I was told this when I was very young too, is that you can take a no. So like as young people, we're often very scared to ask, not just questions in general, but ask for funding, ask for opportunities. And I wouldn't ask. It's very common for young people not to ask, but you can take a no. So just be a little brave and be like, and just ask the question, ask for it.
I'll share one last thing quickly. I would say from working as a corporate campaigner at Canopy, I've gotten really good at LinkedIn stalking. So definitely utilize LinkedIn to your advantage. There's another extension called UpLead, where you can look at people that are working with organizations you're interested in. And then even if you can't get into a certain negotiation room or a conference, if there's a conference happening in the same city as you, invite those people out for coffee, ask them questions. I realized from young person asking questions, going for coffee chats, as we mentioned previously, mentorship is a huge role, and many professionals love sharing their knowledge with young people, because they get to talk about themselves and what worked for them, what didn't work for them, which people always love doing. And Marina and I were actually on the same COP delegation when we went to COP24, and I remember I almost didn't apply because I think, oh, I wouldn't get it. The people that get this usually have masters in poli-sci, and that's not me. For every opportunity that you apply for, keep track of those, and if they reject you, ask for feedback on why they rejected you, particularly for grants and funding applications. Get that feedback and then ask them how you can improve, so for the next ones, you know how to improve and you can get your foot through the door. Take every no as an opportunity and see where that takes you.
I totally agree with everything that my very wise panelists have said. Maybe just one extra thing I would add. The reason, I think nobody would argue that the reason there's even a youth panel right now at this assembly is because of the youth climate strike movement in 2019. That's the reason why youth became like a sexy checkbox to add to every panel and assembly. And like that's great, that's a step forward. But those young people, myself included, were not waiting to get a foot in the door of institutions that already existed without us. We're creating our own doors, creating our own movements. So I think there needs to be a really healthy balance between like stepping into these spaces and speaking our truth and shaking up the system internally a little bit, but that has to be balanced with being outside of the system, pushing against it. And that you don't wait for a door to open to do that. So I think you need to do both of those things. And I think it's hopefully, for me at least, and hopefully for you as well, it's empowering to know that I don't have to wait for a door to open, and I have the power already, and I have even more power once I start joining forces with my peers and my community members to shake up and break the door down.
Thank you.
Buen día.
Good morning.
René Calpanchay, abuelo del pueblo Atacama.
I am René Capalchay. I'm a grandfather from the people of Atacama.
Del territorio de los salares, donde está el litio,
From
que ahora nos trajo algunos problemas.
From the region of Los Salares, where we have lithium, which has brought us problems.
Problemas que desarrollan el cerebro y el corazón.
And these are problems that develop the brain and the heart.
Por eso, muy agradecido a los jóvenes. Nos despertaron en el presente.
And thank you, youth. You have woken us up to the present.
Para que entre todos nos hagamos cargo del tiempo y del espacio en el que nos tocó vivir.
So that we will all take responsibility of the space and the time which has been our turn to live in.
Y para eso debemos dejar de hacer lo mismo si queremos resultados diferentes.
And that's why we should stop doing the same thing if we want different results.
Qué diferente regenerarnos, regenerar la naturaleza, regenerar la energía que nos une a todas las culturas.
And what is that difference? To regenerate ourselves, regenerate nature and the energy that unites us all.
Y para eso comparto con ustedes. Compartir y no competir.
And that's why I'm with you. We should not compete, we should cooperate.
En nuestra cultura es la complementariedad, es la reciprocidad, donde nos valoramos porque todos somos necesarios para empezar a hacer las cosas distintos.
In our culture, that's what we do. It's reciprocity. We all complement each other to be able to do the things we need to do that are necessary.
Y en esto de buscar armonía, vivimos los últimos 2.500 años priorizando el cerebro.
And in searching for harmony, we have been living the last 2,500 years giving priority to the brain.
Que nos trajo algo que no debemos renegar, ciencia y tecnología, de punta ahora.
Which has brought us something that we should not negate, which is science and technology.
Pero como modelo, como costumbre, nos olvidamos de los valores, nos olvidamos de la sabiduría, nos olvidamos o no lo tomamos importancia a la experiencia de miles de años.
But we forget the experience of 1,000 years before us, of values, valores, experience,
y cultura,
and
sabiduría ancestral.
Ancestral wisdom and culture.
Son tiempos y aquí viene la pregunta.
And here comes the question.
¿Les parece que nos sumemos todos los que estamos en esta sala? Y la pregunta no es solamente para ustedes que están en el panel.
So the question is, and maybe we should all unite, and this question maybe isn't just for you in the panel.
Que los cambios no se hacen por voluntariado, porque es lo último que hacemos cada uno de nosotros porque siempre tenemos prioridades. Entonces, que los cambios vengan desde la inversión colectiva.
So that change that we're looking for shall come or must come from collective investment, not volunteer programs, because nobody has time for those.
Un mundo mejor es posible si lo hacemos entre todos, gracias a ustedes los jóvenes que representan el presente. Nosotros los viejitos somos responsables de lo que hoy ustedes tienen que arreglar, pero nosotros también podemos regenerar nuestra alma, nuestro corazón y armonizar el corazón con la cabeza. Y si armonizamos el corazón con la cabeza, es el buen vivir.
So a good life will come from harmonizing, and that's what we bring, us, the old folks, from harmonizing the brain with the heart. But thank you for what you are doing, you, the young, the youth.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Hi, I just want to quickly say something. I don't know how much time we have left here, but for those in line to ask questions, if the grown-ups don't mind letting the youth speak first, I think that would be, this is a great space to do that. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Isa, and I'm possibly one of the youngest people here. I'm 17. I'm only a senior in high school. And something that, oh, thank you, which I think is an issue, as mentioned by the first gentleman here, is that like no one knows about this, and that's not our fault because I'm on my phone a lot, and I think, and I go to school, like I'm a good student, and not enough like education that's accessible and interesting to youth is being like put out in the world. It's mostly like boring stuff that like no one wants to read. And like, you know, we don't have a very long attention span thanks to TikTok. So I think that like a big way for more youth to get involved, because I do think like how we get more funding and action is if more people know about it, because like they can't ignore us all, right? But the thing is there's not enough of us there, and I know a lot of people my age who would love to be involved, but they just don't know about this event. So just a suggestion maybe is that like big companies or you guys in your nonprofits as well, like really promote your social media, because I know it's like really looked down upon right now because it's like Facebook, you waste your time on it. But I think there's a lot of growth there. And I know if I was on my phone and I found out that this youth forum was a thing, there would be like 20 other people my age who are super passionate about climate and super passionate about human rights who would be here standing with me now and even younger if they simply knew about it. And these girls, or anyone, like girls or boys or theys or thems, they have a lot of knowledge in them if they just knew about this place and are given the opportunity to speak and also learn about it in school. Like climate change should be part of our curriculum. Yeah, thank you.
Ouais, je suis Moniré Priscilla Kapupu. Je viens de la République démocratique du Congo.
Hello, my name is Priscilla Kapupu. I come from the DRC.
Nous sommes honorés d'être ici parmi vous. Néanmoins, nous avons suivi, il y a cette inquiétude de dire en rapport avec la participation. Et pour moi, je me dis, le premier défi, c'est déjà la langue.
We're very honored to be here. We've been following the events, but there was a comment made about the participation here. But for me, the first barrier is language.
Parce que si on avait pris en compte la considération de langue de la CBD, on allait se retrouver ici. Parfois, on arrive devant le portail et on se dit, bah, ici, on parle de quelle langue? On dit c'est uniquement l'anglais. Ça ne nous donne pas vraiment de l'occasion de venir vous suivre. On se dit, bah, c'est l'anglais carrément, qu'est-ce que je vais suivre là-bas? Et ça nous empêche de participer. Quand cela ne tient, je m'en vais pour contribuer en disant que nous tous ici, nous savons que l'Afrique est parmi les continents les plus jeunes. Donc, sa population, c'est 40% de la jeunesse dans la population de l'Afrique.
So, continuing on the subject of language, I want to take part in certain forums. However, if I notice that there's only English without interpretation, then I'm not able to follow or participate, unfortunately, even though I would like to. And then the second point is that we all know that Africa is one of the youngest continents. 40% of Africa are made of young people.
Cela ne nous permet pas non plus de participer plus à des conférences comme ça, à des instances comme ça, parce que ce sont des choses qui se passent souvent sur le numérique. Et nous tous, nous sommes sans ignorer que l'Afrique, en rapport avec le monde de la technologie, on est encore à un niveau très bas.
Another barrier to access these international forums is that unfortunately many things are digital, and we know that in Africa access to digital is still very limited, so that's also another barrier for us.
Et du coup, je me tourne maintenant vers FEM. Je me pose la question, pour accéder au fonds, parce qu'il y a beaucoup d'initiatives en Afrique. Quand cela ne tient, la jeunesse a beaucoup d'initiatives qui ne sont pas répertoriées. Sur base de ce qu'on vient de signaler, d'abord, il y a l'accès à la technologie. Et en dehors de cela, il y a toute une procédure de GEF qui ne permettent pas en fait, aux jeunes africains de compétir à un programme quelconque en rapport avec le programme de GEF.
So, and then I would like to speak about financing for GEF. There are a whole lot of initiatives done by young Africans. However, because of access, for the aforementioned reasons like digital and also the cumbersome process, there's many young Africans who just have no access to the funding.
Et maintenant, pour nous, la jeunesse, pour en finir, je me demande comment est-ce que nous sommes en interaction avec nos ancêtres, donc je dirais les pratiques ancestrales, parce que nous allons comprendre, selon la courbe de tout ce que nous présentons comme courbe des changements climatiques, on a observé qu'au fur et à mesure que nous sommes en train d'évoluer et au fur et à mesure on est en train de perdre certaines valeurs culturelles, certaines pratiques, et cela est en train de nous amener à une chute. Et comment nous, la jeunesse, nous sommes maintenant en contact avec tous les savoirs détenus par nos ancêtres. Et c'est une question qui pourrait nous interpeller tout et chacun selon les domaines. Et c'est ça aussi mon message pour la jeunesse qui se trouve ici. On ne doit pas casser, on ne doit pas se voir, c'est comme si tout ce qui était ancestraux, c'est quelque chose qu'il ne fallait pas. Donc, on est dans un monde moderne et du coup, on doit se focaliser avec tout ce que nous voyons comme moderne et laisser de côté tout ce qui a été de pratique qui a pu sauver le monde jusqu'à ces jours. Parce que nous, tout ce que nous détenons, nous les avons hérités chez nos grands-parents. Et ils sont déçus pour nous de nous d'avoir une génération comme la nôtre.
And then to conclude, I'd like to invite young people to also not forget our ancestor. When it comes to climate change, of course, right now we're heading towards collapse and we've lost some of our cultural values. But my message for young people here is let's not just break everything that existed before. Of course, we live in a modern world, but let's remember our heritage and let's remember what our grandfathers, our forefathers and foremothers taught us for the future as well.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you, merci.
Hey, my name is Farnoud Chamanyan, and I'm standing here. First, I want to thank everyone sitting up there and everyone here for showing interest for this global issue. I want to start off with a statement, and the statement is a universal understanding of the environment as a foundation for the youth will enable young people to enact change that will benefit and cherish all generations. Now, what does that statement mean? I necessarily want to add on to what some other people have said as well, is the education. I believe if we educate all the youth all around the world as a global initiative, we will actually be able to change the future. Now, why do I say that? Us humans, if you ever look at history, we always have a chain reaction of everything. Everything in our life is a chain reaction of what happened with our grandparents all the way back to their grandparents and the older generations. So what I say here is that we don't have the power to initiate that change. I don't think youth have that power. I believe that the older generations have that power at the moment. Now, the real question here is, are we willing to really change that power, starting with the elderly and the older generations, giving that power to the youth so that the youth can take care of the elderly? Because that is what the real chain reaction that will save us. Like, do you guys think that this generation will be able to initiate a youth an act of chain reaction, which the youth will be educated to take care of the older generation? That was my question.
I'd just like to make a comment on that. I get what you're saying, and that I think that does actually stem a little bit from like the 7-generation teachings within Indigenous culture, and that intergenerational teachings and knowledge is super important. But I think the way you may have structured it, it sounded like it created a power imbalance. Personally, for me, that's how I heard it. It isn't. We're all trying to take care of one another. We're all striving towards a collective goal, and I think what has been said is like empathy. The colonialism caused climate change. The patriarchy is very prominent in our society, and those things do stem from the lack of empathy. Climate change is the lack of empathy towards our environment. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's my little intervention there. Thank you.
I do want to say that I agree with you about this principle of mutual care between younger generations and older generations. I think that's really important. And we have a lot to learn from cultures that have figured that out. I also want to use a little bit of broken French and Spanish to respond to the folks who shared in those languages. Entonces, primero al abuelo de que habló con nosotros en español. Muchas gracias por compartir sobre sus normas culturales muy impresionantes. Thanks for sharing about your cultural norms. Y estoy de acuerdo con usted que necesitamos un movimiento y una revolución, no solamente programas voluntarias o filantropía o los non-profits. I really agree with you that we need a movement and a revolution and not just volunteer programs that no one has time for. Okay, French. Merci beaucoup de partager avec nous votre perspective. Je ne sais pas comment dire. C'est très difficile parce que les gens qui parlent couramment anglais sont typiquement les gens avec plus, je ne sais pas comment dire, privilege, mais plus avantage. Et c'est un vrai problème. Et je suis d'accord avec les idées sobre les ancêtres et les générations avant nous. Donc, merci beaucoup. I really agree with you about the generations before us, and it's also really hard that people who speak English fluently are often people with more privilege, and then they're the people who can access these spaces. So I just wanted to say, I hear you, je vous écoute, and thank you so much.
So I know we've got one last commenter who's been waiting patiently. I just want to check in with my panelists. We're a little bit over the scheduled time. You're okay to go a little bit longer? And maybe we'll take one final comment and give you all a chance if you want to share any closing remarks.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm so sorry to take up your time for lunch. To the speaker before me, I might let you down because I'm actually probably the youngest. I'm 15 years old right now. And I really appreciate this opportunity for me to speak up here because it's hard for me to imagine that I can do this. So I'd just like to add two short comments and hope you don't think I'm too ignorant. So I think youth leaders, such as you guys and me and all us people, I think we're at a perfect position. So in this meeting, in your speech, you mostly talk about like how to reach up. Say, if the youth leaders are in the middle, and there are all the other youth and younger people and who lack of knowledge of environmental protection and everything, and there are like the decision makers on the top of this hierarchy. You were mostly talking about how we can get funds and how we can reach up to those people who are on top of the hierarchy to be able to make the decisions. But I think it's also important for youth leaders to reach down to those people who are lacking the knowledge, and it will be perfect for us to do that because we're right in the middle. And I've grown up, so I'm 15 years old, and I've spent 12 years of my life in this Chinese mega city called Shanghai. I'm not sure if you have heard of that before. And also the other 3 years in Toronto. So I've surrounded with all those like urban kids, and most of them are not interested in environment at all. And I was also in the environmental council of our school. so-called environmental council, but the school doesn't really treat us well as the other councils. They don't approve all those proposals we have written. And most people don't really care about environment. So I think the awareness of the environment among the youth population in Canada and internationally is also a really important thing that we should care about. And the youth leaders should take action to spread this knowledge to all the other people. And although we have environment-related things in our, say, Ontario educational system in curriculum, but pretty much it's kind of boring, and also teachers don't really care about it. Say my science teacher skipped that unit or just gave us a few slideshows. Sometimes many other science teachers do that too. So I believe it's really important to raise the awareness in an interesting way conducted by youth leaders. As important as reaching up to the decision makers. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to just offer any of the panelists who want to share any closing comments.
I'll say something as a response to the last question. So I'm actually going to Shanghai on Friday for work to the Intertextile Yarn Expo. So to your hometown, really excited. I echo your sentiments. I know when I was in school, when we were talking about like weather, that was a unit that was relating to environment. That was basically it. This was years ago. There's so many amazing organizations out there. I'm from Vancouver, so ones I can think of here are Be the Change Earth Alliance, Davis Week Foundation, SPEC, Society Promoting Environmental Conservation, Threading Change as well. We go into classrooms and we do these curriculum that sometimes these curriculums don't hit. So whether it's fashion, circular economy, SDGs, so there's resource guides through an organization called Climate Reform BC that have compiled a list of resources for educators across the province in BC and Alberta, and I think soon to be Ontario as well, that showcase ways that you can bring these teachings to the classroom. And as a response to what the girl said earlier, TikTok is an amazing resource to get to young people. So another recommendation for GEF is if you can get a TikTok account to promote some of these events and other things to young people, it will be very useful. For hire a young person to do it exactly. For Threading Change, we had a clothing swap and a young person went viral on TikTok. We gained 1,000 followers in 3 hours because the event was something that was interesting. Don't underestimate the power of that. And as we champion for more of these through this unified voice, we will get there. Just wanted to say that.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to sort of combine a response to actually quite a few questions and comments with also a closing comment. I hear a lot from non-youth-led organizations, especially like large resourced organizations like the GEF, asking me, how do I reach the young people? Where are they? I want to support them. How do I do that? And then sometimes I see these organizations build their own youth program or like their own sort of small grants fund. A lot of the time, these are not actually led by or run by young people. A lot of the time, these end up reaching those sort of superstar youth that Sophia was talking about earlier, the people that are already in this room, frankly, people like me who get invited to these kind of things all the time. And what they do is they compete with existing youth-led, often grassroots initiatives, some of which have been around for several years, decades even, that are actually doing this work. And I really agree with the last speaker about young people being best suited to reach other young people. And young people are already doing that. We're building our own knowledge sharing programming. We're going into classrooms within our community. We're running capacity building programming. Youth for Nature's two of our three pillars are knowledge sharing and capacity building. And it's all about by youth, for youth, skill building, training, networking, knowledge sharing, educational workshops that run locally on the ground by our various staff and volunteers around the world. And those are effective because young people listen to other young people. We care about what our peers have to say, and we know how to talk to each other in a way that's engaging and interesting, whether that be on TikTok or through another educational programming or workshop in a school, for example. So if you're sitting there thinking, how can I help young people, please don't build a program that you designed with maybe like a couple other token youth that you invited, but is ultimately actually crowding out, competing with existing grassroots youth-led work. The good news is you don't have to do that. The youth-led work exists already. I think all of us are part of multiple, some of us, movements that are run by youth addressing different issues collectively. Fund us instead to do this work. We're way better at it. We're going to be way more effective. And that's also a way for you to take a part in actually redirecting resources. It's much more powerful and systems changing to just give the resources to the people that already know what we're doing than to try to do it for them.
I'll just make two brief closing statements. The first one is, if you heard anything today from the panelists that made you feel a little uncomfortable, a little uncertain, challenged your worldview, I really ask you to lean into that uncomfortability. Let that be a moment for you to challenge yourself and grow from it. I think as grown-ups, and even as because I'm in my late 20s, it is easy to fall into not to continue your learning. So I hope you felt a little challenged today. And secondly, for the non-Indigenous people in the room, if you're in a conversation like this, or negotiations, or like anything that when we're talking about climate, biodiversity, the environment, if you don't hear the word Indigenous rights, Indigenous peoples, then there's a gap. And I urge you, if you're an ally, to do the work to ensure that every conversation that you're in, Indigenous people are mentioned. Thank you.
Conclusively, I think this is a good step, and I wish to encourage GEF that, at least for the context, from what we've heard from the colleagues, young people, and Africa in particular, we would welcome a conversation, a robust conversation, comprehensively on how to really integrate and engage youth in processes, and really talk a conversation that appeals to the young people. So I wish to, well, if they do not reach out, we will. So I think this is a good start, and I wish to thank you all for participating with us.
Okay, so I guess let me turn it back over to. No, I think we're at time. So okay, we're over time.
It's actually impossible to summarize. The one thing you should know is lunch began at 12:30, which was not a reflection on how exciting you were, but it is a reflection on a free lunch. The other thing I wanted to say is that in terms of the audience that many of you spoke to that was here before lunch, it wasn't all about the numbers. You had ministers here, you had the leadership of the GEF, you had the leadership of the CSO, you had the science folks, so you actually had some of the most important possible decision makers to assist in the things you're looking for. And so I didn't want you to be disheartened that those who had stood around the room had gone off to a different round table. I think that we learned a lot, and to the point that a conversation is not just about talking, but it's about listening. I think everybody listened to each other really well, and I certainly hope that you will take seriously and help us with the offer that we got from the GEF about what is it we can most do. We don't want to create new entities, but if we can help network your networks. All of you have said this takes time, this takes money. we don't want to add to everybody's stress, but we want to help with the integration. And all of this, has taken a long time. Some harken back to the 70s in the environmental movement. I harken back to the beginning of the Partnerships for Permanence in 2006. So, I think all of us in this room want to get to where you want to get to, and it requires our collective effort in building on each other's capabilities and strengths and listening. I do think that some of the things that were mentioned, the Gustavo Fund, the training, the country youth leaders, et cetera, that GEF has, would be useful for us to follow up with you. And staff will be putting together a summary of this meeting and sharing it back with you. And we hope this isn't a one-off conversation. I understand completely what you're saying. On the other hand, we don't want to exhaust you. So this balance of true collaboration and communication and listening and talking is really important. And so I think with that, I had many more things that I could have said, but for us old folks in the room, I think we are really committed to investing in youth, to mentorship, to sharing what it is we know, which isn't that much, but to learning what you know and working together in true collaboration and true partnerships and true conversations. And just like some of you said you get invited too often, it's because you're such darn good communicators. There are millions of scientists I could have invited on stage who are not darn good communicators, but we were really lucky to have this one, Dr. Rashid Somalia, and I am going to give him the last word, followed by, now that we've had food for the mind and heart, there's food for the body, and we will then reconvene at 2 o'clock, but you have to take everything out of here because they're going to reorganize the room. And Rashid, I give the last word to you as a consummate communicator whom all of these folks are right behind you in being.
Yeah, so I just have to reconnect with the future, huh? The future, and I'm not going to say much. Lunch is ready. I just want to say I was very proud just sitting there listening to you. All the good ideas, the inspiration, sometimes the gettiness to be uncomfortable, the oldies, yeah? It's all good. I mean, so I'm sure the room is also very proud of you, isn't it? Yeah, let's give them a hand. Yeah. Thank you so much, and let's stay in touch. Let's push each other to get to where we all want to be. Okay? Thank you. Yeah, thanks.